Good afternoon, everyone. This is Michelle Rosado, and I work at the Connecticut State Department of Education. And I want to welcome you to the second in our webinar series, Learning at a Distance. This webinar series showcases how Connecticut schools and districts have implemented teaching and learning virtually. On behalf of the Connecticut State Department of Education, I want to thank you for attending this webinar and learning from your peers. This is definitely uncharted territory, and we certainly need to lean on each other and learn from our best practices and learn from our districts near and far within Connecticut on what's going on, what's working for our students as they learn from home. The staff at the Connecticut State Department of Education is here to support you, and I hope that you and your families continue to be well. Today's webinar focuses on the experiences of two districts, Bristol and New Haven, as they navigate learning at a distance. Let me just go through a couple of housekeeping things for our attendees. First of all, again, thank you for attending. And just to remind you that all attendees are in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. However, we welcome your questions. Please use your question box to pose your questions, and those questions will be addressed by our presenters at the conclusion of the session. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be posted to the Connecticut State Department of Education COVID-19 webpage. So our presenters, first, I'd like to thank them very, very, very much for taking the time out today to share their experiences with all of us. On behalf of the Commissioner of Education, I extend our thanks, our heartfelt thanks to them. So we have a team from Bristol Public Schools. I'm going to introduce Dr. Catherine Carbone, the superintendent, and she will introduce her team. And then from New Haven Public Schools, we have Lynn Brantley, the supervisor of literacy. Catherine, thank you for joining us again, and I'm going to kick it off to you.
Thank you for the invitation. I'd like to introduce my team. As Michelle just mentioned, I am the proud superintendent of the Bristol Public Schools, and the dynamic team that is going to help facilitate today's session is Ms. Carly Fortin, our Director of Teaching and Learning, Gina Rivera, our Director of our Pre-K 5 STEM, and Jamie Reckenberg, who is Director of 6-12 STEM for the Bristol Public Schools. Before we begin, I just want to echo Michelle's sentiments and hope that you are all well and your family is well and safe. We are going to share our way of thinking about teaching in a virtual environment and keeping true to our North Stars and our equity stance that learning is for all, and to ensure all of our learners can access the lessons and the platforms that we design for them. There are 3 learning targets that we're hoping that we will achieve throughout today's presentation. The first is that participants will be able to identify how our key elements within our district's vision inform the development of our continuation of learning plans for the Bristol Public Schools. Secondly, that participants will be able to identify how our guaranteed viable math curriculum is evident in our virtual classrooms and lessons. And thirdly, that as a participant and having interest in this webinar, that you can identify and replicate some of the teacher leaders, the way we've structured our teacher leaders, and leverage our multi-phase implementation structure to build your capacity within your own school districts. Moving forward.
I'm trying.
Just a little bit about Bristol. The graphic to my left, which is the thank you to the Bristol Public Schools, is actually a parent who made this. It's actually hangs next to the Bristol Board of Education, and we have in Bristol, we're called Bristol, the City of All Heart, and she gave a couple shout outs to not only her children's school, but Bristol Public Schools. And that really represents the coming together throughout this period of our school closure, and exemplifies hopefully how we're leading with heart. Bristol Public Schools has 8,300 students in its enrollment. 20%, representing about 1,700 students, are students that need special education supports in some way, shape, or form. We have 8 community eligibility schools, which basically is about 50% of our students qualify for the federal foods program. 423 of our learners are English language learners, which includes 6 bilingual schools. And of our 12 schools and 2 programs, 26 countries are represented, and our children speak and families speak 27 different languages. So creating our phases in our implementation of our plan, we took all of that into consideration and stayed true to who we are. During this school year, we use a framework. It is our framework of excellence and equity, and it's before you. At the center of which is the student, or our vision of the graduate, which we've articulated the standards and skills and dispositions we feel that our K-12 learners need to possess when they leave the Bristol Public Schools. Surrounding that is the first circle, and we're going to lift many of the attributes within that first circle. We call that our North Star. It is the closest, the classroom level, the closest to the student. Best practices that we feel will elevate high quality teaching and learning. And there are 3 North Stars that we're components of the North Star that we're lifting this year. The 3 are North Star 1, or component 1, which is creating a positive learning environment. Element number 2, or component number 2, presenting clear and challenging expectations. And it is coupled with North Star, or component 5, which is individual goal setting. You can't have a articulated individual's goal for a child or a learning target without having that goal setting component with a feedback loop. The reason why we're sharing our components of our North Star is that when we created the phase-in for our math program, or phasing in the teaching virtually within math, we stayed true to these 3 principles. And first and foremost, ensuring that positive learning environment and creating relationships virtually. 3 examples of how we created our virtual relationship building is through mimicking what we would do in real life. We lifted this year the concept of circles or crew to develop high quality relationships. The picture on the left hand is an example of circle with all of our administrators in our district. The picture in the center is an example of our high school seniors at Bristol Eastern, who in turn created a video sharing what they miss most about their high school. And then our young man to the right, sharing what he has learned over his time at home, and produced a song and sent it back to his teacher. So one of the key components to creating an equitable classroom environment virtually is also to create those relationships, and that is our first highlight. I would want to introduce Carly, who will take the next part of our moves.
You're muted. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share more about how we've used our Bristol framework to ensure that as we constructed learning in a virtual way, that it would maintain the high quality instruction that we expect on a day-to-day basis when students are in our brick and mortar school buildings. I wanted to highlight more from our framework that helped us develop some strategic moves that supported greater equity in our design of virtual learning. Bristol has long engaged in the continuous improvement cycle, with teachers working in teams to make tomorrow even better than today is. In the virtual environment, for us, that meant we would strategically plan for virtual learning in phases, allowing us to establish specific goals, strategic actions, and an opportunity to study the impact of our actions on students' learning so that we can make the next phase even better. You'll hear later in our presentation more about each of the phases. One of the ways in which we support continuous improvement is by building the capacity of our educators through coaching, feedback, and purposeful collaboration. In designing the virtual learning environment, we ensured that this purposeful collaboration would continue with the support of coaching and feedback throughout each phase. Given the varied needs of our students, we cannot provide high quality learning experiences for students without personalizing learning. In the virtual environment we've planned, it was important to us that all learning be asynchronous, allowing families who may have limited access to technology or who may need a more flexible alternative schedule to access their learning at times that work best for them. We have not encouraged any live direct instruction since we know it would be likely that not all of our students would have the opportunity to participate in learning at a specific time. We continue to personalize learning by providing responsive instruction that is tailored to students' needs. Responsive instruction can be individualized lessons or audio meetings with students tailored to meet students' specific content or skill need, and you'll hear more about that later on. Finally, we felt it was critically important that we maintain our focus on clear and challenging expectations. Like you, I'm sure you found your inbox flooded with all of the free materials, products, applications that teachers could use during this time of closure. We didn't want our teachers to select those free opportunities, assignments, applications, and veer away from our Bristol curriculum. So in our planning for continuation of learning, we intentionally ensured that we kept and maintained our clear and challenging expectations of our Bristol Public Schools curriculum by developing models of lessons throughout phase 1 and phase 2, and continue to support teachers through virtual planning meetings on a weekly basis. Here you could see our 3 phases, bringing us to where we are right now. I won't read over the entire slide for you. I'm sure you all can read, but I did want to highlight some specific purposes of each of our phases. Within phase 1, we ensured that we had met students' basic needs, ensuring food security and ensuring that all of our students in Bristol had at least one device within their homes to use. Throughout this time, students engaged in district-written, curriculum-based supplemental learning that was easily accessible to students and families, either via our webpage or in hard paper copy. In phase 2, our focus was on improving student, family, and educator efficacy with technology. Again, we provided district-written, curriculum-based lessons for all grades and content areas that could be accessed by families in the way with which they were most familiar, the way that they access their materials from phase 1. These lessons began the transition from supplemental learning to learning that moved our students forward in the curriculum. Since teachers had high quality plans to use within phase 2, this allowed our teachers to really focus on making those connections with their students. During this time, students reached out to all of our, teachers reached out to all of our families, they connected with each student, and they provided responsive instruction based on the district curriculum. Their secondary focus, teachers' secondary focus during this time was to build their efficacy with applications within Google Suite, and we provided a learning sequence for teachers to bolster their skills using technologies. Students, families, and educators all were building their efficacy with technology during this time, helping to build a more positive mindset about approaching learning in a virtual way. In phase 3, all of our students are now in virtual classrooms through Seesaw in grades pre-K through 2 and Google Classroom in grades 3 through 12. Throughout this phase, students are engaging in asynchronous new learning and differentiated responsive instruction. And again, you'll hear more about that later on. Teachers are using these virtual platforms to better personalize or tailor their instruction and communicate with students and families. And within this phase, we are shifting from teachers learning more about technology to learning more about instruction and how to instruct best within this virtual realm. Next slide.
I'm trying.
There we go. Okay. To highlight a little bit more about what we've done to build the capacity. In Bristol, we are not a one-to-one district, though we certainly have aspirations to be so in the future. We knew that if we wanted to ensure high quality instruction within a virtual environment, we would need to spend some time building the capacity of our educators to teach virtually. We began in phase 1 by determining the available assets we had within our district. One asset was the strength of our library media specialist. Within district, we have 7 library media specialists to support 12 schools and 2 programs. Our library media specialists offer to support their home school and at least 1 additional school or program. And they work together as a team to build a technology toolkit for teachers, which included print and video resources and provided specific webinars for teachers within their school and their additional school throughout this time. Another asset we knew we could rely on were our teacher leaders, whom we've now utilized as planning leads or Google Classroom coordinators. By repurposing Title IV funds initially budgeted for a live technology professional learning experience for teachers, we were able to support a stipend to support a Google Classroom coordinator for every school and grade level, pre-K through 5, and every school and subject area in the middle schools. At the high school, we built a structure of Google mentors by asking for volunteers from the high school level for individuals who could use their technology skills to support a colleague who might be new to the platform. Across the district, our teachers are meeting in planning teams on Tuesdays in 1-hour sessions to identify the most essential learning targets for the following week and share in the planning of those lessons. At the elementary level, 1 teacher per grade level has been designated as the planning lead for ELA, math, or science. The following week on Wednesdays, grade level teams meet to share with each other what has been planned for the upcoming week. In this way, we've created a system of interdependence among our teachers and while narrowing the focus of their planning, resulting in higher quality instructional activities for students. We built virtual schools, which you could see in the slide here within Google, so that each planning lead could share their work with their colleagues in one place, easily accessible to the Google Classroom coordinator who will ultimately post the assignments. While we had talked about collective teacher efficacy prior to school closure, we really have seen how our teachers are using their strengths to support the collective quality of instruction that our students are receiving through the systems and structures we've built, guaranteeing excellence through equity. To talk more about our specific math curriculum design, I'm turning the presentation over now to Gina Rivera, our elementary STEM supervisor.
Thank you so much, Carly. I just want to thank all of you that are on this webinar today. Thank you for all the work that you're doing for Connecticut students. We all are in this together, and I just want to say that I'm grateful that you took time out of your busy day to spend the time listening to our math story. One of the things that I always think about is when you're in a learning environment, if you could think about making one commitment today based on everything that we're presenting. So we're going to present our perspective on how we presented e-learning for mathematics across our district. And so I know lots of you are doing amazing things, but I ask that maybe you consider one of these things as you move forward in your learning. So where we started our learning was based on the essential learning. If you could back up one slide.
I tried. Hold
it's
on.
okay. All right. Well, I'll try to back it up. So there it is. Okay, we're back. So the first thing we did by grade levels, we identified the essential learning, and we looked to the documents from Achieve the Core. So if you've never used this, you can access this document from the Achieve the Core website, and it's the focus for each of the grade levels. We knew that as we moved into e-learning that we needed to be really focused on the most important work at each of the grade levels. In this document, you can see that there are green squares, and those identify the major work of the grade level. So before preparing for all of this, I sat with my math coaches, and Jamie worked with her math coaches around identifying what is the most essential learning within this last part of the year that all students need to access, and we designated that as our guaranteed and viable curriculum. Included in that is a fluency piece. So if you look in the lower bottom right, you're going to notice that there's a fluency standard included in that as well. Because all good teaching and learning is anchored in strong standards, and we didn't want this time to be a time where students would fall behind. So identifying this essential learning was critical to begin our journey through asynchronous e-learning. Okay, I'll wait for the pause. There we go. So one of our tenets is rigor. And so in mathematics, rigor is defined with three major areas: conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and application. So as we look to design each of our units of study, and as teachers engage in planning with the coaches each week, they make sure that they are looking at these three components of rigor. So really looking at the standard and what are the concepts that we're trying to teach students here, and are we teaching them to the deepest level? And so we use different types of lessons. So they could be recorded lessons on Screencastify. We're using virtual manipulatives to help students understand the math concepts within that essential learning. In addition, as students are learning, they start to develop procedural fluency. So as part of our weekly lessons, we include time where students are engaged in taking what they've learned within the concepts and start to get fluid in some of those procedures that now they're learning and they're engaging in. And there's a misconception around fluency. Some people think fluency means fast, and that's not what fluency means. Fluency means that students have an efficient way to get an answer that's correct. And finally, the most important piece is the application. Can they take their concepts and procedures and their fluencies and apply them to interesting math problems that can be solved within their e-learning environment? So you'll see those components throughout each of our plans in both phases 2 and 3. The other critical component was looking at student efficacy. So we knew as a district that students sometimes will signal to us, or families will signal to us, that mathematics is a really hard subject. And so sometimes they'll say, I don't know how to help my child with math, or math is really hard for me. And so one of the things that we looked at was we looked at the work of Dr. Timothy Canold, and he really talked about building student efficacy. So if you were to start anywhere in terms of feedback for your district, think about signaling to students that belief that you can actually do mathematics at the highest level. And so when we enter these e-learning environments, so right now we're in phase 3, things that teachers should be saying to students are comments around high expectations. I believe that you can meet these standards. I believe that you can do this mathematics. And that important feedback helps students to believe that they can actually do it. If you enter with feedback that is maybe just about the work, or saying you got these items wrong, it may signal to them that they cannot do it. So instead, we're giving examples of 3 different ways that you can provide feedback. So first of all, you are part of this class. I created these lessons just for you. This class is special, and I believe that you can reach these high standards. That is there because we are a district that believes in North Star 1. So even though we're in this mathematics learning environment, the first signal we need to give to students is that we believe that you can do this. We believe that you can hit these challenging learning targets, and we believe that you can meet these essential learnings. And that statement within itself helps students to believe in themselves, and also signals to the families that we believe in them as well. So that was another critical component of our plans. Here's an example of, I know it's coming slowly, it's okay, of what phase 1 and phase 2 would look like. So Mrs. Fortin did a great job of explaining what phase 1 and phase 2 would look like. This is what it looked like for mathematics. So when we first left school on March 13th, in the beginning, for those first 2 weeks, we had supplemental work. And so those were packets in the beginning, and they were either printed packets or they were accessed through the BPS website. Within those, we still focused on essential learning, but we went to supplemental learning. So what was previous essential learning that students had already mastered, and we gave them tasks assigned to that, including fact fluency. When we got into phase 2, then we put everything onto our BPS website or onto our Google Classrooms, and work started to be collected. And at that phase, we started to incorporate our BPS vision of having learning targets. And that was a critical piece because we knew we wanted to mimic what students had encountered in the classroom every single day. When students went into a math class, they saw a learning target. So we said, we're going to put this into our e-learning environment. In addition, work was submitted through various platforms, which you'll see on the next slide in a minute. And teachers were providing feedback to our students. So signaling those kinds of things. I believe that you can do this. I believe in you as a student. You're an important part of this class. And let me give you some feedback around this mathematics. How can I help you take this misconception and move you towards mastery of this essential learning? So here's an example of one of our phase 2 documents. So when we were in phase 2, there were 4 ways for students to submit work. So for those students who were not in a Google environment, so mostly those were our pre-K through grade 1 and 2 students, some too were in Google. Parents would email in an answer, they would take a picture of the work, or if they were using Reminder Class Dojo, they could take a picture of that assignment and it would be submitted. For those students in 3 through 12 who were in a Google environment, the teacher could run their Google Classroom, or they could actually take the Google Doc and they could complete it and submit it. As you can see, the important parts of rigor are still within our plans. We didn't forget about rigor now that we've moved into this e-learning environment. So you'll see our procedural skills and fluency. So there's a fact fluency piece built in during phase 2 for students to work on. And again, it wasn't about speed, it was about doing some examples and finding efficient ways to do them. And then the application. So we focused in on problem solving. We knew that they had learned these standards previously, so we wanted them to develop a deeper understanding. Within those documents, you can see there was a PDF for those students who just were going to complete the task on a piece of paper and email it in, or there was a Google Doc available to teachers so they could actually submit it into the Google Classroom. In addition, we provided optional games and activities. And actually, this is an interesting part that we learned is providing games where we had to engage several family members was something that was difficult for families because they were working and some of them had several children at home. So we said moving forward, we can't always include games that are asking families to do math because it didn't always fit into all students' schedules. So we made that optional because we always had our eye on equity. And so if we knew all students couldn't do that, then we needed to move out of those areas and move into work that all students could complete.
So I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about our secondary approach. There were 3 critical components that needed to remain embedded in the middle school continuation of learning plans for phase 2 and beyond. First, we wanted to maintain the use of the illustrative mathematics. The students have become accustomed to the instructional practices and processes embedded within the program. The IM approach, while rigorous and constructive in nature, is highly engaging and provides exploratory opportunities for students. This supported our philosophy of clear and challenging expectations for students. Second, it became clear that the content embedded within the IM program could not be reached due to the sharpness in the transition to new learning platforms. So the secondary math coach, Michelle Canton, worked closely with teacher leaders to identify lessons in the IM program that housed the highest priority standard. The leadership team used Achieve the Core to substantiate their lesson selections. Those high priority standards and IM became our driving focus for BPS distance learning in mathematics for middle school and Algebra 1. In phase 2 of distance learning implementation process, we provided students with a recap of previous learning from the IM program. As students engaged in new situations for learning and a lack of normal and structured learning environments, students could at least feel comfortable with the mathematical content. Students practiced high priority and major cluster standards throughout the 10 days of phase 2. The defining difference from phase 1 was that not all learning was accessed from a digital site and returned to the teacher in the form of technology, and students received feedback specific to the progress toward the priority standard. The grading scale utilized in this time period was lesser incomplete, thus allowing the district time to identify families with limited access to technology and/or appropriate supports. At the high school level, we maintain the same philosophy of supporting students through the transition with comfortable but high priority content. The defining difference of high priority stemmed from the likely presence of the topic on the PSAT or SAT. High school students in phase 2 engaged in review practice-based learning through Khan Academy or the CK12 learning platform. Each learning experience had 3 components: a video interactive, a Cornell note-taking structure, and an adaptive practice. All of the adaptive practice problems utilized came from the CK12 platform and supplied teachers with actionable response to student learning needs. It is important to notice that the first two phases of distance learning implementation provided the district with some much needed professional learning and capacity building time. During the window of March 13th to April 20th, the district utilized dynamic and tech-savvy teachers and district leaders to build the capacity of staff and to ease the growing pains as we transition to the new digital learning environment. Prior to March 13th, BPS did not have Google Classroom expectations or have devices for each student. This shift required significant planning and learning in regard to the use of the new digital platforms, Seesaw and Google Classroom from the teacher's perspective. As an additional support, the district invested in and trained Google Classroom and Seesaw coordinators. This foresight allowed for a smooth transition into phase 3. The major difference between phase 2 and phase 3 are the full implementation of the digital platforms and the strategic teaming of teachers, of math teachers, special education teachers, and interventionists to develop and improve learning plans that were anchored in major cluster standards or topics from the PSATs or SATs.
So now we're in phase 3. Thank you, I should say, thank you, Jamie, for that, all of that. Now we're in phase 3, and you can see these are the critical learning elements for mathematics. So on Monday and Wednesday, students are engaged in new learning. So we pick out an essential learning target and we focus on that learning for the week. Each of the lessons have 3 major components. So just like our vision, we have clear and visible learning targets that are challenging. So every student will see a learning target, which you'll see on the next slide. There's a lesson or task closely aligned to that learning target. And again, that was identified through the Achieve the Core map. And finally, there's a work submission. From that work submission, what we're doing on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays is we're responding to the instruction. And that looks many different ways through the Seesaw platform. You'll see students submit work, and teachers will either submit written comments or they'll submit an audio message to the student or also provide reteaching. So that's what responsive instruction would look like in pre-K2 in the Seesaw platform. In Google Classroom in 3 through 12, when students submit their work, teachers are also submitting written feedback to students. They're also asking them to resubmit work. So we're really moving towards a standards-based approach so students can resubmit their assignments as many times as they like. And then on Fridays, we were dedicated to looking at Tier 2 intervention, something that we called WIN. And we didn't want to get rid of WIN, which is what I need now. So now on Fridays, what we do is we take the essential learning for the week and we provide lessons around either enrichment or reteaching aligned to learning for the week. So those are specifically assigned to individual students. So for those students who have shown us through their work submissions that they understand the essential learning, we can enrich them and we can bring them deeper into that standard. For those students that are still struggling, we're providing more responsive instruction, and we're working as grade level teams to talk about what are the different strategies to help move them towards this grade level essential learning. So these Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays are really the times that we're providing that important feedback and the responsive instruction to make sure that students are getting the learning that they need. Here's an example of a student view. So if I was a 4th grader in Bristol Public Schools and I opened up my Google Classroom on a Monday or a Wednesday, I would see something like this. Immediately, I would have a greeting there because that's our North Star 1. And you can see that the unit is on multiplying whole numbers and fractions. This is actually a 5th grade unit. And right at the top, we have our learning target. So just like students would enter the classroom and see their learning target, the learning target is within the Google template that students have. And so that really signifies that we are expecting clear and challenging expectations. We believe in you as a learner, and we want you to meet these high standards. We personalize their learning through a sequence of lessons that would be similar to what they experience in the classroom. It was really critical that we mimicked what we saw in the classroom in this new virtual e-learning. So just like Mrs. Fortin said earlier, our inboxes were flooded with so many different programs that we could have latched onto, but what we decided on was let's stick to what kids know, let's honor the knowledge that they're bringing into the room, and let's honor the curriculum that we've spent lots of time creating. And so that was a critical piece. So you'll see within there the elements of rigor. Our number routine is there for fluency, a daily lesson to build conceptual understanding, and then a daily practice. And we also try to embed some parent resources. So within this Google Classroom doc, you'll see an example anchor chart. So just like a student might walk into a classroom and see an anchor chart that they can refer to, in this Google Classroom, there is an anchor chart. So this would be what they would see when they enter their Google Classroom. On the next slide, this is the actual student view. So now this is actual 4th grade lesson, or I should say 5th grade. So that's going to be a typo. I'm going to fix that. This is a 5th grade lesson. Here is the actual activity. So they start with a number routine. And what's very interesting is in 5th grade, we spend a lot of time on discourse, and students love to talk back and forth. That document, that number routine, is a document where students have to say what's the same and what's different. Well, because it's a shared doc, all students can chime in. So they're having written discourse within that one document around that idea. So that's how we're building fluency in a shared environment within Google. Then their learning target comes up, and then next comes their activity. And you can see within that model, we're building conceptual understanding of multiplying fractions using visual models. What's interesting about those lessons is they have specific pause points where students have to stop and reflect and write down what their current conception is. I don't like the word misconception, but what their current conception is of the learning that's going on. And then what it does is it takes them through a short progression of learning and finally a work submission. And that work submission is where we do our responsive teaching on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I'm going to hand it off to Jamie.
As a district, we believe students should still have the ability to explore and learn rigorous mathematical content despite the change in environment. As a result of this belief, Phase 3 middle school assignments have a 2-day learning plans posted on Mondays and Wednesdays, and all of that learning and practice are embedded within a single interactive Google slideshow. The structure of the slideshow mimics the routines and structures found within the IM classroom experience. Each of the 2-day lessons is anchored with a simple student to-do list and a student-centered learning target. As students work through the slides, they are prompted to use the embedded interactive features to explore the math concepts. Each lesson provides students with a warm-up, new learning, application of new learning, and an exit ticket. The responses collected through the slides and the embedded Google Forms provide teachers with the data to drive responsive instruction on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. Planning teams has been critical to the success of the Planning teams have been critical to the success of strong planning and curricular implementation of Phase 3. At the elementary level, teams are comprised of grade level representatives from each building, a math coach, and a special education teacher. At the secondary level, the major difference is that a single math coach supports all secondary teams across the district, and those teams also include math interventionists. Each team works under the direction of the math coach. The coach has identified the priority learning targets. The collaborative groups unpack those targets, identify success criteria, and divvy up the work among the team. The team members complete their responsibilities and share their lessons the following week during a content review session. In this meeting, all teachers preview the learning targets and corresponding lessons to make minor modifications before the lessons go live on the following Monday or Wednesday. This process exhibits the district's core values and beliefs in the power of and positive outcomes related to high-performing teams.
Okay, so one of our core tenets is building capacity across our district. Now, this might look like a simple document to you, but this is actually a very important document because this is a way that teachers, leaders, paraprofessionals, special education teachers can access all of the Tuesday grade level team meetings. So all of our coaches, as you heard, are now district-wide coaches. So I had 4 math coaches that now are working as district-wide coaches. They each lead different grade level teams, including our illustrative math super user teams, to be able to create lessons for students across the district. Each of those teams has a grade level rep, it has special education teachers, and principals are welcome to all of those meetings. This document itself is a Google Doc. All of those links are the links to all of those Zoom meetings, and any principal is welcome to any of those meetings at any time. So just like in a real world, a principal would enter a PLC or a collaborative meeting and be able to visit to understand the essential learning going on at each of the grade levels for each of the subjects. This document would do the same. So if it was 9 o'clock, a principal could go to a 3rd grade ELA, a kindergarten math, or a kindergarten science meeting, and they could look in and see what is the essential learning going on and what is the planning. These teams are building capacity because as these teachers work with coaches, they're developing a deeper understanding of all of the standards, they're working together to develop lessons, and they're collaborating with special education teachers. We have more areas to grow on this, so we're moving towards equity because I would like to invite more people like ELL and also paraeducators, but we're going to continue to grow our teams as we build capacity throughout these phases. So here's an example of an agenda and what actually happens at this meeting. Now, I will say ahead of time, we engaged in common planning and we had professional PLCs. So this is the shift of what it looked like in an e-learning environment. So in the past, we always had norms. So in these grade level meetings, now that there is a representative from each of the schools, they're brand new teams along with special education staff and leaders, we reestablish norms for each of these meetings. In addition, we continue to follow our North Star 1, which was building relationships. In this e-learning environment, it was more critical than ever that we're really connecting with the adults that we're working with and checking in on them to make sure that they were okay. And then thirdly, as part of the agendas, besides planning the lessons for essential learning, we were always looking to improve. So we brought back feedback. The teachers would bring back feedback on the work that students submitted, and we would change the lessons or alter them or make them better. So that way the next week of learning would be even stronger for students. And these are running agendas that all of the team members have access to, including building leaders.
This slide showcases the rolling agenda action items for the remainder of the school year in regard to distance learning. Each of the secondary teams meet twice per week, Tuesdays and Wednesdays. The Tuesday meetings are dedicated to the unpacking of the targets and the assigning roles and responsibilities for the development of the upcoming lessons. Team members showcase their work 1 week and 1 day later from that initial planning team meeting. During this Wednesday content review session, team members evaluate developed lessons through their unique lens, intervention, special education, or classroom teacher. The lessons finalized during the Wednesday meeting will be posted by the Google coordinator on the upcoming Monday or Wednesday. At the high school level, teacher leaders facilitate planning around the identified learning targets. Each team member is again assigned roles and responsibilities for the development of the posted lessons and record the ideas in the template shown. Teacher collaboration in high-performing teams has been a Bristol belief for more than a decade. The transition to distance learning highlights the strength of those collegial relationships and the teacher's attention to producing high-quality student learning experiences. As educators, we all know that in learning, feedback is critical. Despite the change in learning environment, teachers are continuing to progress monitor and provide students with constructive feedback toward the achievement of success criteria. In the K-2 domain, students receive verbal feedback to their work through the Seesaw platform. For grades 3 and above, students complete exit tickets at the end of their daily lessons. The exit tickets include math-focused prompts and some SEL questions. The student responses from both the exit tickets and practice problems provide teachers with discrete understanding of student progress. To attend to the personal needs of students, teachers use Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays as responsive instruction days. During this time period, teachers make connections with students that have gaps in their essential understanding. These actions showcase Bristol teachers' dedication to personalized learning. These responsive connections are currently happening through one-way communication as we investigate the safest means to engage in two-way communication with students.
So being a reflective district, and we're always thinking about continuous improvement. We believe in the continuous improvement cycle. We're already thinking about next steps. But what I want you to walk away with today is really understanding that even though we moved into this virtual math learning environment, that we still hold true to who we are as a district in terms of our vision, in terms of the research-based practices that we use for mathematics, and what is good math teaching and learning. And so that was a critical component. We didn't throw any of that away. We stuck with our curriculum. We stuck with what students were familiar with, and that was really a critical piece, because from a teacher perspective and from a student perspective, they were able to walk into virtual environments that were similar to what they had already experienced, but now we're transitioning them with technology. It couldn't be exactly the same, but we tried to mimic it the same because we wanted to honor what they already knew so they could feel as comfortable as possible. So moving forward, one of our next steps is really engaging families more through social media. So helping families to understand what is the mathematics that's being taught and how can they best communicate those needs to us so we can better understand how to help them at home with math, because we know math is one of those subject areas that sometimes students struggle with, and we want to empower parents to be able to have some phrases or strategies to help them. The next thing we're thinking about is at each of our meetings, we're going to start recording them and making them available to paraeducators, ELL support, and to administrators and staff that can't attend them, because if they missed their grade level meeting, they could go back and rewatch it to have a clear understanding of what was the essential learning, what was the expectations, what were the lessons that were taught. And so we're going to create a bank of professional learning videos around what's happening at these planning meetings, so anybody can go in, because we know our students that need the most help are usually supported by paraeducators, but they need to understand the grade level essential learning to be able to best support them and what strategies we're using to be able to help students access that standard. Secondly, well, I should say thirdly now, we're looking at new applications. So we've been in Seesaw and Google Classroom, and we're going to stay in those as their major platforms, but we're looking at possible things that we can add in to make things stronger. So applications like looking at Jamboard, looking at Flipgrid, and looking at other pieces of software that we could eventually add to get to some assessment. Our next really big endeavor that Mrs. Fortin has given us is how are we going to measure this essential learning? How are we going to assess it? So we're going to be talking about that as a grade level team. And then finally, how are we going to meet as vertical teams so I can communicate as a third grade teacher, this is the material that I covered, to my fourth grade team. So as we begin the 2021 school year, they have a better understanding of what actually happened in phase 3. And so we know how to then help students move into their new learning. So with any great team, of course, it's made up of many members and many voices. So we wanted to personally thank everyone on this slide, which would be our district math coaches, including we had Anne-Marie Spinelli from CCSU, a professor who helped us with preschool math, and Lindsay Ramos, who is a correct education specialist. We also wanted to thank all of our library media specialists who helped us on the technical side, because none of this work could have been done with just Jamie and myself alone. We needed our coaches to be able to lead these grade level teams and our technology specialists to help empower our teachers so we could all grow and learn together. And we're still continuing to grow and learn, not only from each other, but from other districts. So we appreciate all of you as you share your ideas through these webinars.
Finally, we want to, again, just bring it back to our core elements. Our phases from phase 1 to phase 3 follow along with our district framework for equity through excellence. And any questions that you might have, we will answer later in the presentation. A thank you to Carly, Gina, and Jamie for all of the work that they have created and crafted over the past 6 weeks. And please follow us on Twitter.
Thank you so much. We're going to transition right now to Lynn, and we're going to have a little bit of time at the end for questions, but I want to make sure Lynn has time for her to take us through the ELA side of things. So Lynn, I'm going to turn it over to you. Lynn?
Yep, there I am. I just needed to unmute. I'm sorry. So good afternoon. My name is Lynn Brantley, and I am the supervisor of literacy K-12 for New Haven Public Schools. Today, the presentation that I have for you is focusing in on how just the literacy department provided a continuum of learning for our students and how we supported our teachers through utilizing some of the structures and systems we have in place. So I want to give you a little bit of a background on New Haven. So I'm sorry I'm moving my head both ways because I'm looking at my notes as you can actually stop there for that. And I can move the slides myself at this point, but I believe. So the district profile at this time, we have 21,014 students enrolled in New Haven Public Schools. 17.6 of them are English language learners. 16.6 are special education students. 63% qualify for free and reduced lunch, and 25.6% are considered chronically absent. Now, this last data point is incredibly important when we're understanding how we engage students who, prior to COVID-19, were often disengaged. So you see my problems and solution slide. So all districts, I know, moving into distance learning experience some level of problems, right? And some of them moved more seamlessly than others. Some may have had one-to-one devices in place. Some had active Google classrooms in place already. Others may not have. And for our district, those two areas were a struggle. We did not have one-to-one in our district. We have a very large community. We did not have Google Classroom in every classroom, so this was going to be a move that was going to need, guidance and professional development for teachers and for kids to get used to, and certainly for parents. So we looked for solutions quickly. So providing resource supports for over 1,000 teachers, that's what we have in New Haven, is one job alone. And those teachers service 44 schools. So we have 44 environments to work with. And again, the 22,000 students. So we really needed to make sure that this transition was planned out and done well. So the literacy department had already had a very strong relationship with the bilingual and special ed department. We work in a team called LIM that we meet monthly, and we work on all of our planning together. So this was a huge asset. This was a great piece to our work thus far. We were able to channel that expertise quickly for our work. And I'm sure, as many of you heard through the media, New Haven students were struggling with Wi-Fi issues, computer issues. We've had some wonderful support from Yale and from some private donors in trying to build up those resources for our students. But in terms of leveling the field at home, we knew we needed to work, to create an online system and also an offline system. And so we had to do that in both English and Spanish, also to take in our bilingual population. Let's see now if I can move this, or am I not moving my slides? So there were things to consider, right? Prior to doing any of this work, this gave us, we had a time in which we needed to look at practical issues. And some of those issues were, what essential resources would be unavailable for teachers in order to do the lessons that they normally do? And we knew that teachers exited classrooms quickly. We were given a short time that we had to get packets together, but we certainly didn't have enough time to think through all of the things that needed to come home in order to support lesson delivery. Did you bring your letter tiles for foundations? Did you bring your books that you needed for your shared reading? All of those things. So those were things to consider when we were going to build the platform and resources for teachers. The other thing we needed to think about was, how do we utilize the existing structures and systems in place in order to support teachers in transferring to a new form or a new platform? And you heard Bristol, if you were on the call prior, talk about that, right? So we made conscious decisions. When we looked at our units of study, we, one, kept to our units of study that we were using. We wanted to give, and honor the work of our district in creating our curriculum. We wanted to make sure when it was put online, it was in a format the teachers were used to utilizing. They knew the structure of it. They knew everything about the way it was formatted. So we left that the same. And then last, we wanted to mindfully choose topics that supported our community's emotional well-being. So just an example, 8th grade, 4th quarter reads Monster. Monster is a book by Walter Dean Myers. It's a very heavy content. And we talked about it as a team and we decided this wasn't the time for kids to read this book. And so we changed our unit of study to a happiness unit. And we incorporated some work from Common Lit that we usually use, and we had level text, and we designed a new unit, a mini unit, to kind of bridge this move into our in this transition into our distance learning. Oops, it went backwards. Let's see. So our next step was to build a sustainable plan. So we knew we were going to have to do this most likely for a while, and we needed to gather everyone together in order to build a sustainable plan. So we have a small team at the district level of literacy people. We have a lead for high school, we have a lead for intervention, and we have someone that actually works on only adaptive platforms. So that team worked together on the 17th. And from that work, we decided that we were going to have lead coaches in these 44 schools that were going to be defined by grade level. And so that meant that if you were a coach and you were assigned kindergarten, you were going to cross all schools, all elementary schools. And the 9-12 coach would take on the 10 schools that we had. Their job was to review the next unit of study, to provide resources, strategies, and objectives to ensure, again, that the curriculum we have was honored and continued, to work alongside our bilingual and SPED departments. We invited the coaches. We have a coach from special ed that is assigned to our reading department, and we have 2 that we work very closely with the bilingual department. We worked with them and we pulled them in immediately in that meeting to launch our work. And the first job was to get together 2 weeks of support by the 30th, because we knew we had given the task to teachers to give paper packets prior to that, and we needed to be ready to pick up from there. And this work had to be structured in a way that we could continue this work. We needed to start out strong, and we needed to be able to have the structure and system in place to continue the work. So here was our planning cycle, and we continue to use this. We actually just shared this at our teaching and learning at the district level meeting. So the very first job was for the first 2 weeks, or for 2 weeks, we would plan out lessons. Those lessons would be planned in the structures of the lead teacher or the lead coach and their team of other coaches. And they would have to include, of course, resources for English and Spanish. They would have strategies and objectives in every lesson, and it would align to their next unit of study. The meetings, the first meetings, were held by myself and key literacy leaders. And we looked at those draft lessons and we gave feedback. One example, we have a very overzealous staff and very hard workers for sure. And one grade level had about 40 supplemental support documents to their 2-week lesson. So you can be assured that we had to roll some of that back, right? And then those lessons were approved and moved on to our literacy website that we have. We have that literacy website that teachers, again, know how to access, have been using in a format they're familiar with. So those lessons were lifted up a week prior to them being launched, so teachers could have them. And coaches held meetings with all the staff at their schools. They then provided the tutorial and went through the supports that were provided on the website. Any of the resources that were put in there were given sanctioned by us or by the state or by our RESC. We wanted to walk through it on those 2 days. And lastly, we come back in this cycle and we review and make adjustments on the pacing. And we already have made some adjustments on both the packets that we provide for students that don't have website access and for our online access, because we have learned quickly that students are struggling to keep up in this time at points. It's been difficult. We have a lot of parents who work during the day and they're coming home late trying to do work with their children. We also know that we needed to put multi-levels of passages in our packets, and perhaps we needed to scale back to 3 per week versus the original 5 per week that we put in. So all of those things had to be considered. Sorry, this does not move as easily as I would like. Whoop. So if you can go back, or I can go back, one of us can go back. We're going to go back to, it is going forward. I want to go back to the website. So if you can help on the end of bringing up the website, would be awesome. So this website is what I was speaking about, of where everything lies. This is our normal curriculum website. You can see that we have all of our curriculum on it, right? This is our New Haven Public School curriculum. And so I created a Learning from Home page. If you're able to scroll down a little bit on it, whoops, kind of in the center, you can see the schedule we provided for each grade. You can see that there's a biliteracy folder, which services our biliteracy schools. So it has different lessons within there. And if you wouldn't mind opening one of the folders from your end, awesome. And in there, you can see the documents that we're providing for teachers. If you wouldn't mind clicking on one to just view. Thank you. This is what I mean about keeping the setup the same. Right? We always have had a setup of essential questions, what we're using for our standards, our strategies. You'll see wherever there are links, those are ones that were vetted by us, as I said, or the State Department of Education or the RESC. And it gave some loose guidelines around timeframes. And that was stated on the original page. If you look again back to the website itself, up on top, you will see where there is a mock kind of schedule for teachers. And it was just a suggested daily schedule. It aligns with how we wrote our lessons. It gives some loose frames per grade level. We know that, kindergarten is going to look differently than 9th grade. It also has a link to the packets that were handed out directly to schools so that teachers knew what was going out in those packets. Those packets were not the teacher's responsibility at this time. So the written work that we gave in written form in English and Spanish, the literacy and bilingual department took on themselves together to take that heavy lift off of the teacher's plate. But I wanted them to have a place that they could quickly, go to and see how it aligned to the work that they were given in their lessons that you saw earlier. And also on this page is a link that's provided for teachers. There's a free open office time in the afternoon. Some of our staff has graciously volunteered, and they are available to work through any kinks in Google Classroom with them. All of those things are provided on that website, along with our curriculum that we have at all times. So we can go back to the slides now. So not only did we want to provide resources for our teachers, in terms of what they were teaching every day. But we also needed to keep, it's okay, I'll wait. Perfect. We also needed to keep our coaching in place. So we have coaches, as I said, in every building. We're now providing outlines and resources for lessons. We're providing packets that need to go home in English and Spanish. We're providing all of those supports, even open volunteer office hours to manipulate and learn how to use Google Classroom better. But we also wanted to keep our coaching in sync. Right? So coaches are still working with their teachers. And so we wanted a plan again that was sustainable in this way. So coaches were guided for these points. Right? So they were suggested that they have themselves linked to all literacy classrooms. So they're attached to every classroom in their building that's teaching literacy. They review Google Classrooms daily. They can pick a grade or they can pick multiple grades that day. It depends on how big and small the school is. They were to model lessons as if they were in a classroom normally. When they found teachers struggling, teachers reached out and said, struggling with this transition, how to do my mini lesson online now versus in the classroom. It's taking me so much more time, or I don't know how to really do this well for our students to be explicit and clear in the timeframes that I have. And coaches went in and they were guest teaching to provide model lessons. They develop resource banks that go beyond what you saw on our website. Every coach knows their building. Every coach knows their students. And so there might be some resources beyond what we have in place in there that they can develop for their teachers that they work with closely every week. They're still giving feedback on lessons. They're still talking with teachers. They're still discussing, okay, again, our big learning was what we thought could happen in a day sometimes took 2 and 3 days. And how do we scale this back? And how do we work through all the standards we know we want children to be working on, yet in a way that's different on this platform? They also support their building leadership teams. Many of them do the morning message for the school. Some have, classroom morning messages, but schools have morning messages, and they could be literacy defined. They all support grade level meetings, which Bristol talked in depth about their grade level meetings. We have been keeping ours also, and we have been capitalizing on not only going through the resources, but what professional development we can infuse there now that we have time with smaller groups of teachers of literacy where other distractors aren't happening. They have planning groups with their lead coaches. And of course, they have literacy staff meetings with the district team. They've also been accountable for their work through a weekly calendar shared out. So I can see what's going across the district, how many grade level meetings are happening, what areas are being hit. Prior to this, we had a Google form that we kept for our coaching logs so that we could actually monitor adult actions, right? Where did we push in most? Was it in tier 1? Was it in testing at a certain time of the year? So we could adjust our work. But this now shows me a snapshot of schools, since there are so many, of what is happening when. If we can move to the next slide. The other piece that's been very important in New Haven is providing intervention supports. We have many, many students that struggle. And so we needed to not have a missing beat on that. Right? So Lexia license is one of the things that I'm sure everybody received notice that they could get free for their schools to the end of the year. And so in our early grades, we teach foundations, and we have very few schools still using Words Their Way. But we quickly realized it was a difficult transfer to online learning with foundations, even though we had lead coaches in those areas. So we gave the option of schools to be able to use Lexia in place of their foundations lessons in K3 so that we could still make sure that our foundational skills were hit. So every coach received a letter from Lexia they were the ones that had to go forward and apply for those extra license. They applied for the extra license. They created the classrooms for the teachers, and they and a special ed teacher were the leads in the school. So they helped because the teachers are monitoring, of course, all the flagged lessons that were coming up. And when necessary, they would go in and help with recording direct instruction lessons. The other big move for us was we have Read 180 and System 44 and a few other platforms. We have Imagine Learning and Achieve. But historically, Read 180 and System 44 has been heavily relied on for grades 5 through 12. Those classrooms had two versions. We had Next Gen, which was not accessible at home, and we had Universal that was accessible at home. HMH worked quickly with us and allowed us to have free license till June 30th for all our students. So we had to move them quickly online to that. So our district coaches held 3 sessions with our intervention teachers who were new to the new platform on the 26th, 27th, and April 1st. Got them acclimated quickly, moved all the children, all the students on those license, and HMH has continued their work with us. This system was important because we go back to the thought about our kids that are critically absent. Some of them lie in these classrooms. These classrooms are very small groups, and now our teachers had a way to contact kids quickly. We knew and we could track how much work they were doing online, and we could provide people that were in charge of reaching out to smaller groups of students and trying to find out where they were, how well they were doing, and trying to get them back on the road to learning. We also utilized our tutors, which were both reading and ASL, and we had them attached to our Google Classrooms for support. And then the learning continued. So we didn't want to just think about all the learning for our students. That is hugely important. That's always in the forefront. But as teachers, as professionals, we need to continue our learning. And so we have been in the middle of our Connecticut reading model learning, and we have 2 cohorts. We have cohort 1 that's in its second year and cohort 2 that's in its first year. And we met early on with the team from the Connecticut reading model, and they were very, very good about allowing us to buy into our conversation on whether we can continue this work through this trying time or not. And everyone unanimously wanted to continue. So we have been continuing that work. We just had yesterday a cohort 2 meeting. We had a webinar with Literacy How around tiered instruction and strengthening it. And we had teachers and administrators, special ed teachers, coaches, all present in that meeting. Friday, we have cohort 2, which is in their first year, and they've been working on some survey work, and they're working on scheduling and strengthening their foundational skill sets. And so they will be working. So that series has been very important to really anchor our work, not to forget our own learning. The other place that learning continues, again, coming back to grade level meetings. We collaborate on student work through Google Classroom. Some of the initiatives has come out of cohort 1's work from the reading model, the principals there. They wanted to start taking time to take the student work through Google Classroom, put it up, and be able to review and refine the feedback. And we had early on in the year done work with the continuum of learning from TLC. They are anchoring their review of student work on that knowledge, and everyone is able to be very active within that. As I said, administrators, teachers, coaches, and specialists all have been a part of that learning. So that continues, and we're happy that certainly continues to keep our own knowledge growing in literacy and providing what we can for our students. So I do want to thank you. This is my contact information. I would like, feel free. I know it's a difficult transition right now, and this is a large urban district. I'm sure many of you that are attendees today may be from those districts, and we can learn from each other. I'm sure you have things that I can learn from, and I have things that I can share with you. I believe that we've moved to this different platform pretty smoothly, and incredibly so with the people, the teams that we have. And we are now having discussions around what summer looks like, you know, if perhaps we are in this situation, how do we take the learning that we did from the intervention piece in our planning and our execution in order to make sure we meet or at least reaching all of our substantially deficient kids that we need to provide for in the summer? How do we open school next year? How does that look? Right? How does the first 30 days look, whether we're online, whether we're in school? All of those things are conversations we're having. So once again, thank you very much. And I'm glad, you know, I was certainly invited to this, and I hope this was helpful to anyone in the audience.
Thank you, Lynn. That was great. We have a little bit of time to do some questions. But first, I just wanted to make sure that I made mention that our Commissioner Miguel Cardona wanted to just, again, thank you very much for participating in this webinar, and for our audience members for also being on the webinar. He appreciates your willingness to share and support all of our learners in Connecticut, and he just wants to let you know that he's listening in. So. And I want to also let our attendees know that the handouts, the slides have been posted in the handout section, and you can download those. We will also post them onto our CSD COVID-19 website, as well as a copy of the recorded version of this session. So I hope I still have Bristol on the line as well. One of the questions that we had was, what percentage of students are consistently submitting work?
Is that question to Bristol?
I think so, because it happened when you were presenting. So, but I think it would probably be relevant to both districts. But if you wouldn't mind taking that, Bristol.
Sure. So we talked about our phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 implementation, and during phase 1 and 2 was to ensure that all students had access and were submitting work. So we are at 98% of our students are submitting work, and the 2% that there's really about a handful, we're at about 20 right now, who either need a hotspot in total. You either need a hotspot or a computer. Other than that, our students are all engaged in communication, and we had 3 different forms of communication. In the beginning, it was just a check-in. They either did a daily check-in, check-out, and part of the check-in, check-out was an social emotional check-in, so that we could see where all of our students were feeling, how they were feeling in real time. And then as the phases have morphed, it has now become a check-in, check-out, as well as submission of work.
And I think
so we have another question about whether your plans include live teacher training, live teacher teaching, excuse me, or not.
So the Bristol plans are built purposely to be asynchronous. And that decision was made purposefully to meet the needs of our families and our students. In the first part of phase 1, we needed to make sure that all students had access to technology, and if we did a survey across the district to ensure at least at minimum there was 1 device in every home. So there might be multiple children or scholars in the house, and therefore the need for asynchronous learning is critical for homes that have multiple scholars and only 1 device. Additionally, many of our families are essential employees, and so to allow some flexibility for the families to be engaged in the learning, or if they needed to have their child being sought, taken care of by another family member, we wanted to give greater flexibility to families who find themselves in that situation.
Thanks. And Lynn, in New Haven, can you just clarify whether you have live teaching or not?
Yeah, so we do have some. We do not allow teachers to have any ways in which students are shown on video. You know, that came from the recommendation of the state, certainly. So we have teachers that tape their lessons and then put them up in classroom. We do have people that do live readings in the morning, you know, for our younger students, but all of it is taped. The only back and forth conversations are through chat.
Great. So I had a question about how this one is for Bristol. They're interested in hearing more about your approach to measurement and assessment, particularly at the elementary level as you've narrowed your curricular focus. What will your end of year reporting look like?
Gina?
Well, we're actually in discussion about that. I was on a phone call with a professor at Central talking about our youngest learners. So the first thing we're going to do is obviously we're going to assess the essential learning. And so we're trying to look at different platforms where we can do that for our pre-K, K and 1 students. It is going to have to be some type of interview style. That's what we've done in the past. It may be that the teacher poses a question and then the student submits either a video or written response. But in the past, we've always had an end of year assessment. So we plan on doing that same thing, except it's going to be set up in smaller time chunks. And I've actually was thinking about that last night, about maybe setting up time periods where the teacher is going to schedule individual appointments with each student in their class and be able to do that end of year assessment. In our older grades, we'll be able to do a written assessment, but again, it's going to be most focused on the essential learning. So that's what we're thinking about right now. We haven't decided on a platform yet because we're still in the first week of phase 1. So we're just looking at which platforms are students doing well on. And then once we find a platform that's successful, we'll really look at what those assessments are going to be. But the focus is going to be extremely narrow. And it's going to be important that we try to assess the best way that we can in terms of the authentic learning, right? Because we're all doing lots of teaching, but we want to know what actually are students learning in this e-learning environment. So those are my initial thoughts. I don't have an exact answer, but we're in the process of developing that as we speak.
Thanks. I'm sure most of our districts are, struggling through these same types of issues. So it's nice to hear perspectives from other colleagues.
Yeah.
I have another question.
Yeah. I just wanted to add on, like, we're open to collaborate with other districts who have ideas as well around this idea of assessing young mathematicians. So if anybody's interested, our contact info was there. Because I think the stronger we collaborate as a state, the better we can do in terms of assessing the learning of our youngest learners.
Yeah, agreed, absolutely. And if there's any way that the Connecticut State Department of Education can help in setting up collaborative groups or helping you set up any kind of virtual learning you want to do for across the state, we're happy to set up any kind of opportunities that we can do. So please feel free to reach out. Okay, so how has being asynchronous somehow impacted the sense of community that may naturally occur in in-person classroom?
I want to go this way. Dr. Carbone.
Naturally, our teachers would prefer to be doing, real-time in-person teaching and creating those authentic relationships. We've invested a lot of time and energy to help support our teachers to create relationships through what we have just transitioned into a virtual environment, whether that is through our crew. We have a certain format for crew for our youngest learners, or circle, and our teachers are modeling the same practices that they would do on a daily basis, but within their virtual environment. We've had greater, some of our staff have given us some feedback that they're having greater connection. It may not be in unison, but children are responding to the question, the thought of the day, or the activity.
So I want to say in New Haven, we're having a lot of conversation around that connection piece that you bring up. And so we do not have the same percentages you have in the sense of engagement. We might have some schools that 95% of the kids are on, and then we have some schools that 50% of the kids. And we are actually working right now to reach out to all of our missing students. But we've spent a lot of conversation in the last few days about reentry of school and how that looks in terms of our focus and the focus of building that community and understanding. We're really listening to kids. Students and our high school students have had a huge impact. This has had a huge impact on them and their relationships. So we're going to be taking that into consideration as we build in what the new year looks like, how we enter, how learning looks, how we align when we assess and when we don't assess, all those things.
Great, Lynn, this is kind of, you kind of touched on this, but I actually couldn't hear one of the percentages that you mentioned. But someone asked, what is the percentage of student engagement for New Haven? And I know you just mentioned something in your,
Yes.
so maybe you can talk about that.
I can. In some of our schools, so all the coaches met with me prior to the exit of, for our vacation, and that's what we reviewed. Some of our schools will have only 50% of kids on. Our comprehensive high schools are a really tough place, right, to get all our kids on and engaged in inline, online learning and be able to reach out to all of them. But then you can have an elementary school that has 95% of the kids engaged and on. So it really has a variance. It really does. But each school is they monitor by keeping a spreadsheet of who they've contacted that week. They assign case managers from their staff, and our own youth engagement people are going to houses, keeping their 6 feet, but trying to re-engage kids. So it really is quite an array of, or let's say, a continuum. I don't know what the word I want, but it could be again a 50% to 95%. It is something we struggle with, and we're very worried about for our schools that have a lower participation rate.
Great. Well, we're nearing the end of our time together, and I want to again just thank everyone for attending. And I want to thank our presenters very much from New Haven and from Bristol. And again, just please reach out to us at the Connecticut State Department of Education if we can be of assistance to you. I think, although we're not physically together, I think we're stronger together in terms of sharing our ideas and what's going on in our districts. And it just it's helpful to us and our students and our families. So thank you very much and have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. It was nice listening to Bristol.
Thank you. Nice listening to you, Lynn.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah.